Go. Um, Welcome to another webinar. So we're doing CI/CD today, and Atlas is hosting. So for those who don't know, Atlas is currently leading our Django and DRF module in the Perth Plus program. Anyone in the Perth program will be very familiar with her face. For those on the other side of the country or joining us on YouTube in the recording afterwards, hello from the past or the present, depending on when you're listening to this. Welcome aboard Atlas. This webinar will be recorded, so if you want to watch a replay or anything later, feel free to. We do have a bit of a smaller audience, so feel free to put questions in the chat or ask Atlas at any point if you've got questions. But I'm going to turn off my microphone and pass over to the lovely Atlas to get us started.
Thanks for the intro, Kay. Yep, so that was really good. I don't think I have much to say to that, but yeah, I'm currently a senior software engineer working at Rio in Perth, and I'm also the lead mentor for just the Django module. And then today I'll be going through CI/CD and a bit of cloud as well. Let me just get myself sorted. Okay, I think I'll just get started. So, okay. So I just wanna, yeah, I think we should just get started. So this is a high level image of what CI/CD would be, and CI, that means continuous integration, and CD means continuous deployment. And what happens is that we usually would start from here, the code end. Can everyone see my cursor, or is it just me that could see it? Like, yeah?
I can see your cursor.
Okay, so everyone can see my cursor? Okay, cool. So usually as a dev or software engineer, we do start from the code end. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Also, I just have the little chat pulled up on my other screen. Also, just actually, if you have any questions, just either raise your, I think there's like a hand icon in Zoom, or just shout out questions if you have any questions, but I will try to pause in between so that if any one of you have questions, you can use that space to ask questions. So yeah, so we start from the code, and then from that, what happens is that we would have the source code, and we would usually build that code or package it up. In some languages like Java or Kotlin, you do have to build the actual code back into the source machine code. And that's usually through a compiler. So that's just a bit more high level. And then what happens here is that you see continuous testing. So with that, you would do some testing. It could be testing out the functions that you've written. So that would be through a unit test, or you could test out how different components are being integrated. So that would be an integration test. And then there's also front-end UI testing that you could manually do as a developer, or you could write some code to automate that bit for you. And that's part of continuous testing. So these three steps are part of CI. And then what happens is that we get to the deployment bit. And the idea of deploying is basically you want to deploy your software to the end users. So what happens here is that you'll maybe package up a consistent release of the software. Then you deploy it to maybe production, but usually in most cases, you would deploy it to dev. And then you operate on the actual application, and then you do some monitoring, then you kind of go back into this figure 8 loop. So that's more of a high level workflow. And then as we continue on, I'll go a bit more in depth, and then yeah, and then towards the end, I did prepare a little tiny demo on CI/CD using GitHub Actions, deploying it to Heroku, because that's the platform that we're using for deployment. So I pulled out another image, and then you can see the reference link on the bottom, and this is from GitLab, which is another version control, but they provide tools that you can use to develop or automate your continuous integration and continuous deployment. But overall, CI/CD and the cloud, they're part of the DevOps umbrella. And in most places, in most companies or places, they have specific like DevOps roles that you might see across like job posting. So that's another role within the tech industry. But this is just something I wanted to share. And if you're interested, you could definitely go into the link. But these are just the DevOps workflow that I've just went through. You can see that you plan, create, and then verify, making sure that the code is aligning with the standards within your team or your org. And then you package applications to make it consistent. So that would fall under the build step. And then checking any vulnerabilities, and then deploy a release. And then this configure would fall under operate. And then you do some monitoring, and then governing the software that you have just released and deployed. And you kind of go back to the same loop. So that figure 8 image. So that was a more high level overview. But what actually happens before we do CI/CD, as I guess like what we've been doing throughout the Django sprint, or even previously in the Python one. We use GitHub as our version control, and there's different branches that you can create as a developer, but the one main branch that we've been pushing our changes into is the main one, and you can check that in your crowdfunding project under your GitHub. So we have a main branch, and the feature and bug fix, they're just other branches that have been branched off of main. That's why you see this little curve, and then this main, you see this dotted line all the way through. So I guess the scenario would be that as a developer or a software engineer, what we would do is that we have a feature request, and then we branch off of main. Then from that, I do my coding, make my changes. And then once I'm done, I would create, in this case, it will be a pull request for the other teammates to review your code. Then, so that's what this is. And then from that, once you create the pull request, and then you can push onto this, which you see here, it's CI/CD. And essentially, as a DevOps engineer, you would be maintaining and building this system out, because essentially we want to automate the figure 8 process that we just saw earlier. And then from here, goes to publish, or you can see that as deploying to the end users. And then as part of your CI/CD, it would package the software with the changes that you've made into a release. Hence you see V01, that's just the version number. So yeah, so that's one bit. Again, so maybe there's like a bug fix to the change that I've just made from the feature branch. So I could branch off of this code change and then kind of go through the same loop again, because it would go through the same loop, and essentially so the CI/CD system, it will be the same, but it would be triggered based on certain actions, which we'll see in a little bit. So this is more of what happens before it hits CI/CD. Does anyone have any questions, or if not, then I'm just gonna continue on. Okay, I will continue on. So that's okay. So that's before it actually goes into the CI/CD pipeline. And just from the figure A image that we saw, essentially you can do that manually, but every time when you make a change, there's a lot of steps required before you can deploy it. And sometimes we might make mistakes in these steps that we have to type in and remember, or just making sure that we are going through the right steps. So that's why when you hear CI/CD, it's a system or workflow that allows the developments team and the entire organization to deploy their software in a more efficient and consistent way. So to do that, we would essentially want to automate these steps into a pipeline. And sometimes you might hear like CI/CD pipelines or workflows. So that's what that would mean. And I just pulled an image from this source here that you can see, which I thought it's quite a good like image to see from where we have been doing in the Django module. So again, we start from making the code, and then once you are satisfied with your change, these are the Git steps that you would essentially go through locally on your machine. And from that, once you do Git push, it would push it to GitHub, and you can create a pull request. And with that, it could go into a step that could be like preview deploy. In this case, it's a preview deploy. And then the other bit is that it creates another so open pull request, and then it creates a pull request here. But then from here, this preview deploy that you see, essentially that could be a CD step, because you would essentially deploy, it would make sure that your deployment's ready. And then it would hit another action to deploy it to another platform. In this case, it's Lighthouse CI, so that's just another platform. I have another So that was more of a specific example to how to deploy or continuously integrate through Lighthouse CI, which is an open source software created, I think it's created by Google. You can check it out if you want, that makes sure that your front end pages are in alignment or up to standards. So this is a different example, but it's very similar to what we just saw. So make a code change and you push it or you trigger GitHub. And then from GitHub, because you can implement CI and CD using GitHub Actions, you can set up a CI trigger. So that's what this is. So it would do a CI trigger, and then from here, it would trigger another step that would essentially be your CD step, which is deploy it to the cloud. In this example, it would be AWS cloud, which we'll go over in a bit what that would look like. But when it's in the cloud, that means that customers would, or end users would have access to your software or products, whether if it's a backend system or a full stack, or just a one single page application. So this falls under how do we automate. Yep, so this is going through using GitHub Actions, and this is still using GitHub Actions. But there's also Bitbucket that you can use, which is another version control. Bitbucket is another version control, but it also has toolings where you can set up these pipelines. And this is what the current status of Bitbucket look like. And this is the reference link that I pulled from. Essentially, it's quite similar to GitHub Actions, where you could set up your own pipelines. And in each pipeline, you would essentially want to set up different steps according to the figure 8 image that we started off with. So we can see that here, there's these 5 steps. One is you want to build your software, and then you want to make sure that all the code changes are passing testing. So that would include unit tests, integration tests, or any UI test. And then it would do a CD or a CD step, which would deploy to prod. So I think, okay. So I just went through just like a few examples of how to automate it, automate the figure 8 steps. And what happens is that when we automate it, all we have to do is that we just type in git push, and then that would essentially trigger all of these steps to ensure that what the end users are getting, it's bug free, and it actually accelerate the development teams, because it would go through all of these steps, making sure that the tests are passed. And sometimes if it doesn't, maybe you make a code change and you push it and then create a pull request or enact on some type of other trigger. It might some of these steps, like the unit test, might fail. And as a developer, you can clearly see from the platform that you're using. So in this example would be Bitbucket, and you can see that, oh, okay, unit tests have failed. Then I need to kind of go back to see why did it fail, and like how can I what changes do I need to make or resolve the bug essentially. Because once this step fails, it won't continue on with the other steps. I did do, I'll pull out the visual. Was there any question? Or we're all good? Okay. I did start to attempt to do some drawing. It's not my expertise, but I will try. So we would essentially start off here. There's developer 1, developer 2, and other developers that you might be working with. It might be within a team or maybe an open source project. And then what happens is that one developer would commit and push onto the main branch. And in this case, I did put GitHub. So this is in this like blue container, it's GitHub, or it could be another platform like Bitbucket. So I just put GitHub for now. So this is, we've pushed our changes to our repository and GitHub. And from that, there's workflows that would be written in code. And usually they are done by, it could be done by a developer or software engineer or a DevOps engineer. That would be responsible in writing these code out. The code would include like some of these steps that we would see, and it would also include, okay, what would the trigger be? Because it could be that, so in this case, the trigger would be that when people are pushing into the main branch, it would come here into the continuous integration workflow, which would go through some of these steps. Or the other trigger could be that if when someone creates like a pull request, then it would activate the CI workflow. And again, sorry. Okay. So once it's been triggered, it would hit the CI pipeline or workflow. And in the CI, these are just some of the couple of like steps that it would include. It might include dependencies. So if you recall from the Django module, we have a requirements.txt. So that has all of our dependencies. And what we did was that we use pip to install all of these dependencies so that the backend system that we're building would be able to call these different packages. So the other step could be linting or checking for syntax or any standards or rules. So a rule would be that we want to make sure that each code line doesn't hit the maximum length, because at times some people, you could have a big block of code instead of, you could have a big block of code and that would exceed a certain length. So that's just an example of what the linter would check. And then one of the main thing is that you want to run some tests. So we could all do this locally, but in here we could, we're setting a step. So you could run some unit tests or integration tests or UI tests. And then from here, after all the tests have passed, essentially, we would want to build out our software into a release. So in here, so that's part of continuous integration. And then any of these steps, if they do fail, essentially, it would come back to here. So we could see this as like a team. Oh, sorry. This one. So, or a group of people that's working on it. So if any of these steps fail, it will come back to here and it would go through the loop again. Once all of these steps pass, it would go into continuous deployment. And in continuous deployment, we would have, so we already have our release packaged up or compiled up, like ready to go, and it's under like V1 or V2. So here, you might want to deploy the release that you've just done. So yeah, you might want to deploy the release. And sorry, I'm just trying to move this. And then from here, you can set it up in a way that, so there might be, you could deploy the release to like a dev environment before it gets to the end users. And then once that's all like okay, then you could also deploy into a different environment. So it could be like production once it's ready. So from that and to like how these are just like steps that you've set, but when I want to do, I think just this one. When we hit the CD, now I think nowadays we mostly deploy it into like the cloud. So I'm just gonna imagine this as the cloud. And then in here, so in the cloud, you might have, I'm just gonna say, actually, I'm just gonna name these cloud providers because you might have come across this and not sure what do they actually do. So this is Google Cloud Platform. So this is essentially, you would deploy into the cloud. So once it's in the cloud, it would be able to be accessible to your end users. Yep. So in the cloud, like there's actually, let's take a step back. So what throughout Django, what we've been doing is that we've been developing everything locally on our computer, our own computer. And we need an automated way to improve like efficiency and make sure that everything, the process is bug-free. So to do that, we would go through this step here in the blue container. And one way to actually allow access to users would be that you could deploy it to the cloud, or the other bit is that you could deploy it to a self-hosted. So you could deploy it to, I'm just going to put this up. You could deploy it to a self-hosted, like server, because that's essentially what these cloud providers are providing us. What they provide is that they provide servers, so computers that you can put your software with them, so that it could be accessible to everyone. So it's no longer locally on your machine. And then the other main services that most of them provide would be databases, because for the crowdfunding project, we've been working with SQLite. But that particular database has been running it locally on your machine, but we want it to be accessible to everyone, and that's why we would deploy it to another space like the cloud or the self-hosted data center or server that could be accessible to the end users. Okay, so that's that. So GitHub Actions. So I did prepare another little demo here. Okay. Close this one. Can everyone see the Visual Code Studio screen? Okay. I'll take that as a yes. Okay, so in this example, I've just set up a quick endpoint. And the endpoint, it's essentially a get endpoint. So similar to what we've been working with in Django, and it would just return this string here that we see here. And then again, we see requirements.txt, and then I've also added a test file. So this essentially would be a unit test, just making sure that this endpoint returns the right string, and then also it returns 200, meaning that it was able to respond in a healthy manner. So that's more of a high level overview of this small example, but what I wanted to show is that so what we can do is that so maybe I've made a code change, and then I want to like make sure that the test that I wrote passes, or does it fail? So what I can do is I think I'm just gonna check this really quick. Okay. So so what I can do is that I can run the command locally to run the test file here, to make sure that it passes. So I could do these like steps locally, but But I want to automate the workflow just because there's a big team that I'm part of, or our team is very big. Everyone would need to spend time going through these steps. So that's where GitHub Action workflows would come in. I've just set up a continuous integration workflow, which you can see here. So it does some, I guess, like housekeeping items. For example, it would do some linting check. So making sure that the code is it's up to standard and there's no syntax errors before it reaches deployment. So for this bit, I did set the trigger as main for the sake of the example, and it would install whatever dependencies that you've set in requirements.txt, and then it would run through linting. And then from that, it would essentially run the command that I've just ran locally on my machine. So this would be the code example for CI. So once that's all checked, there comes the CD part, which in this, so CD will essentially come after CI because you want to make sure that the code changes passes all the tests that you've written. And then here it's just saying that this CD workflow would only run once the CI.yaml workflow is completed. Otherwise, it would not run. And I've just set a step called deploy because essentially that's what I want to do. I want to automate the deployment instead of me hitting the deployment button like every time when I guess when there's a code change or when the team is ready in some sort of way. So this, when we get to this bottom, that's where it actually gets deployed to Heroku. And again, you do have to provide some secrets for authentication to make sure that your login to actually deploy this little app onto Heroku. So in Heroku, where is it? So so Heroku is the cloud hosting platform that we're using for the Django module. And essentially when I make a change, sorry, oopsie. Sorry, we're gonna come back here. So I've already pushed my repo into GitHub. And in here, you can see the workflows being defined here, CI/CD. But then what the actual pipeline actually sits within actions. And you can see there's a CI and CD. So if I click on this, I can see the workflow that has passed. So these are the ones that failed. So because it failed, it wouldn't trigger the continuous deployment. And that's why you see that it's been stopped. So this one, you can see the different jobs here so that I have set in the code. So linting, and then it will run the test based on the unit test command that I've set within the workflow. And you can see that there's a step here that says unit test, and then it says okay, so that means that it's passed. And once that's, because all the jobs here that you see on the left-hand side, it was all successful. It would essentially trigger the deployment bit. And if you click on it, let's see. So this is just running the deploy to Heroku steps, and must launching release deploy. So you can see that it has deployed to Heroku according to the example app that I have created in Heroku. So if we go back to Heroku, you can see, so this is the monitoring system that you'll be able to see, or maybe you have seen it. If you have already gone through deployment with your group. So you can see that it's been triggered, which is in sync with this workflow here. So the bill here. And then there's some, if you want to check that's been deployed, you can also come to Heroku and check on the bottom that, yep, so it's been deployed to Heroku. And then to actually check the application, you can see that this is a get request I've set, which I've set it to return this particular string. And you can see the URL that the example app demo has been deployed to Heroku. So what happens is that every time if anyone makes a change to the code, for example, if they change some wording here, so be hello, yes. So if I change it here, I make a change here. So I'm just gonna add the change, and then I'm gonna make my commit, update app, or just update return string, and then, oopsie, okay, there it was. Then I'm gonna, once I hit git push, so it was able to push to GitHub, and then I come back to the repo here. If you come to actions again, you can see that the pipeline or the workflow is running. So it would go through the lint step, all of these steps that you would set as a developer in your pipeline. So you can see that it's running through test. Okay, so the tests fail. And you can see that this deployment didn't actually get triggered, because that's what I've set in the code. I said, hey, I need the CI to be completed in order to actually deploy to Heroku. And the reason why the test fail is because I've changed the return string. So I would essentially need to update the tests as well. And then once that's done, it would go through the steps again, the CI/CD pipelines, and then it will get deployed onto here. And then this one would make a change. Actually, I'm just gonna do that. So I'm gonna just make this change so we can all see it. Oops, that's not the change. Oh, I just put hello, guess. So this is the change, copy, and then in the test, I'm just gonna verify that this is the new thing I'm gonna return. Okay. They test. So I just have to trigger it with git push. And then we'll see this running. So these steps that we see, it's essentially what we could set in the code as well. And it's running the test now. Okay, so it looks like the test has succeeded, and then you can see that the green check on the left-hand side. Then now, if you want, you can come to, now you can see that this means that it's in progress. And then you can see the spinning wheel, and then you can see the step deployed to Heroku, successfully logged in, and then it should be able to deploy. And then if you, yep, so it looks like it's still talking to Heroku. But if we come back here, you can see that Heroku is also being responding to what is happening in GitHub, because I have linked them together. So you can see, so this would essentially be the same as what's happening here, but in here it would give you a bit more information as to what is happening on the backend side of Heroku. So let's just wait. It says build finished. And then I can see on the GitHub side that it was successful. So if we come back here and refresh, it has updated the return message. And I think that was pretty much it. Oh yeah, okay. I'll just pull this up again. So that's what that was a smaller example of what a pipeline or CI/CD workflow would look like. And I just pulled this image that would represent a more steps that the engineer or devs could add as part of their CI/CD. And in here we can see that it's doing a build or compiling the code, and then it's running the unit tests, and then it does like an end-to-end test. So essentially that would be testing the backend and then also the front end. And then when all these steps are good to go, it would deploy to staging. So this bit would be the start of the CD pipeline. And then once it has been successfully deployed to, in this case, it's staging or dev, or UAT, you might have hear these words. If not, and that's okay. It's just another server either in the cloud or hosted somewhere in the space. Once this has been successful, it would essentially get deployed to production, where your end users would be able to have access to your application. I think that was, oh. Yeah. There's another example that I could show, which is here that I was able to find. I think just for the remaining couple of minutes. So this is just another application made using Django, and you can see that they have also implemented a CI/CD workflow. So this is where you would access the code by kind of like going to actions, so I can see the steps in a more visualized way. So every row that you see, it's a commit, or it's a push to GitHub essentially that could have one commit or multiple ones. And then you can see this one. So they just have, oh, it's a pre-commit continuous integration.yaml. And you can see all of the steps that they have included as part of their CI workflow. That you can, yeah, so just see. And then here they have another workflow here that does linting to make sure that there's no syntax error. And you can see that they got two things happening. So Flake A is just the linter that they're using. And then you can check that. I don't think there was any. Yep, so these are just the steps that's running the linter. And then here, this would be their release workflow. So you can see that they've set up an automated way to package, build, and produce their release into like the library. So that's what you can see here. So this, I think that was pretty much it. So I think there was just one more thing I wanted to say. This example looks very different from the slides that we've gone through and the example workflow that I've just showed, because it really depends on how you structure it. As a developer, you can structure your steps within CI and also within CD in different ways. But essentially in CD, that would essentially just package, making sure that the release that you want to make accessible to the users are being deployed. So that's essentially like the main concept. And then CI, it's basically where you want to do housekeeping, do some checking, making sure that the code is like all good to actually showcase out to the world. Otherwise, I think that was the end of it. I'm gonna. Did anyone have any questions or? Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks. Thanks for hosting today, Atlas. Sorry, I have moved somewhere a little bit louder, so hopefully it's not too annoying in the background. But that was really useful. I learned a lot from that, listening in, and that was a really good overview of what's happening in the deployment space, which I can be really intimidating and scary for people who are just starting out. We will stop the recording in just a second. Just a reminder that the next webinar is next Thursday, the 24th, which is all about crafting your tech CV. So we've got Kim Bryan hosting that one, who works at Bellrata, which is a consultancy. She's based here in Brisbane, which is where I am right now. So definitely jump on Humanities and grab a ticket to that one if you haven't already. That should be a really interesting discussion and a little bit of a change of pace from the couple of webinars we've had lately that are a bit more technical. It's going to be a little bit more careers focused. So yeah, I can pop a link in the description for this one, and for a reminder on Slack to come join us for that one. But if we can give a little virtual round of applause to Atlas for hosting us today, and I'll stop the recording, and then if there are any other questions, feel free to jump on.
Thank you. Very good. I'll see you guys in class on Saturday. Bye, Kate. Enjoy. See ya.